Admiral Zephyros stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Time's Eternal Dominion *, gazing through the massive viewport at the blue and green marble that hung before them in space. The third planet from this system's yellow star appeared unremarkable, yet his scouts had reported something that made his 4 hearts beat faster with anticipation. Admiral, his intelligence officer, Commander Vex, approached with a datapad clutched in his 6-fingered hands. The preliminary scans are complete. The species calls itself humanity, and they've achieved basic spaceflight capability. Crude chemical rockets, mostly. They've established a few orbital stations and sent some primitive probes to nearby planets. Zephyros's scaled lips curled into what passed for a smile among his kind. In his 3 centuries of service to the Galactic Empire, he had overseen the conquest of 47 star systems. Each time, the pattern remained the same. His massive fleet would arrive. The local species would either surrender immediately upon seeing the overwhelming firepower, or they would put up a brief, futile resistance before being crushed. "What is their military capability?" Zephyros asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Primitive kinetic weapons, some nuclear devices, and basic electromagnetic pulse weapons," Vex replied, consulting his datapad. Their largest vessels appear to be atmospheric fighters and small orbital craft, nothing that could pose even a minor threat to our shields. The Galactic Empire had perfected warfare over millennia. Their ships were equipped with plasma cannons that could vaporize entire cities, energy shields that could deflect any known weapon, and faster-than-light engines that allowed them to strike anywhere in the galaxy within days. The Empire controlled over 10,000 star systems, and its military might was legendary throughout the known universe. "How many of them are there?" Zephyros inquired, already calculating how many transport ships he would need to relocate the survivors to labor camps. "Approximately 8 billion individuals scattered across their single planet," Vex responded. "They appear to be divided into numerous political factions, constantly engaged in small-scale conflicts with each other. No unified planetary government or military force." This news pleased Zephyros even more. Divided species were always easier to conquer. The Empire's standard protocol was to eliminate roughly 90% of any conquered population, keeping only the most useful specimens as slaves or research subjects. A species fighting among itself would be unable to mount any coordinated resistance. "Have they detected our presence?" Zephyros asked. "Negative, Admiral. We remain at the edge of their sensor range. Their detection technology is limited to basic radio telescopes and optical instruments. They have no idea we exist." Zephyros nodded approvingly. The element of surprise was always valuable, though hardly necessary given the vast technological superiority of his fleet. He commanded 300 vessels, including 50 dreadnoughts, each capable of obliterating entire continents. The smallest ships in his armada were larger and more heavily armed than anything the humans could possibly field. "What about their planet's resources?" Zephyros continued his interrogation. "Abundant, Admiral. Rich deposits of rare metals, vast oceans suitable for our aquatic allies, and diverse biomes that would support numerous imperial species. The planet also sits at a strategic location along several potential hyperspace routes. High Command would be very pleased with this acquisition." Zephyros walked to his command throne, a massive seat carved from the crystallized remains of the last species that had dared to resist imperial rule. He settled his large frame into it and activated the fleet communication system. "Attention, commanders of the 53rd Imperial Fleet." His voice boomed across the communication channels, reaching every ship under his command. "We have discovered a new species ripe for conquest. The inhabitants of the 3rd planet call themselves humans, and they possess technology barely more advanced than fire and stone tools. This will be another glorious victory for the Empire." Across the fleet, his subordinate commanders acknowledged the transmission. Captain Thorne of the Dreadnought Times, Starbreaker Times, requested permission to begin bombardment immediately. Colonel Yix of the Assault Carrier Times, Iron Talon Times, asked how many ground troops would be needed for occupation. They all anticipated another easy victory to add to their service records. "Exercise patience, my officers," Zephyros responded. "We shall follow standard Imperial protocol. First, We make our presence known and offer them the opportunity to surrender. If they refuse, which they inevitably will, we shall demonstrate our power by destroying one of their major population centers. After that, they typically see reason and capitulate. The admiral had performed this routine dozens of times before. Some species surrendered immediately upon seeing his fleet. Others required a demonstration of force. A few had been foolish enough to actually attack his ships, but their primitive weapons had been completely ineffective against Imperial technology. The results were always the same: total victory for the Empire, and another enslaved world added to their territory. "Commander Vex," Zephyros called to his intelligence officer, "what is the largest population center on their planet?" "Well, a place called Tokyo, on their eastern continent, Admiral. Approximately 40 million inhabitants concentrated in a relatively small area. Perfect for a demonstration strike." "Excellent. Prepare a surrender broadcast in their primary languages. We shall give them the customary 12 hours to respond before beginning bombardment." As his crew began preparations, Zephyros reflected on how this conquest would advance his career. High Command had been pressuring all fleet admirals to expand Imperial territory more rapidly. The discovery and successful conquest of a strategically located world like this would certainly earn him promotion to the Council of War. Perhaps they might even name the planet after him. The humans, meanwhile, remained completely unaware of the massive fleet lurking at the edge of their solar system. Their primitive sensors continued scanning the depths of space, searching for signs of life among the stars, never suspecting that death was already reaching out toward them with cold, metallic fingers. On Earth, Dr. Sarah Chen worked late in her laboratory at the International Space Monitoring Station. She had dedicated her life to SETI research, searching for evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence. Her colleagues often joked that she was looking for little green men, but Sarah knew that contact with an alien civilization would be the most significant event in human history. Her computer screens displayed data from radio telescopes around the globe, analyzing signals from distant stars for any sign of artificial origin. Most of the signals they detected were natural phenomena, pulsars, quasars, and other cosmic events. But occasionally, they would pick up something unusual that required investigation. Tonight was different. Her instruments were detecting extremely faint electromagnetic signatures from the outer edge of the solar system. The signals appeared artificial, but they were unlike anything in Earth's databases of known spacecraft or satellite transmissions. "That's odd," Sarah muttered to herself, adjusting the sensitivity of her instruments. The signals were too weak and too distant to be coming from any human source. They seemed to be moving in formation, suggesting multiple objects traveling together. She quickly called her colleague, Dr. Marcus Webb, who was monitoring the feeds from the Arecibo array. "Marcus, are you seeing anything unusual in Sector 77 Alpha?" "Funny you should ask," Marcus replied over their secure communication line. "I've been tracking some strange readings for the past 6 hours. Multiple objects, definitely artificial, maintaining precise formations, but they're so far out that our instruments can barely detect them." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. After decades of searching for signs of alien life, was she finally witnessing first contact? But something about these readings troubled her. The objects appeared to be moving slowly toward Earth, maintaining what looked like military formations. "Marcus, I think we need to alert the UN Security Council," Sarah said, her voice trembling with excitement and fear. "If these are alien spacecraft, and they're heading toward Earth, we need to prepare for contact." "Are you sure, Sarah? You know what happened to the last researcher who claimed to have detected alien signals? His career was destroyed when it turned out to be a glitch in the equipment." "I'm sure," Sarah replied, studying the data streams on her monitors. "These signals are too complex and too organized to be natural phenomena or equipment malfunction. Something is coming, and I don't think they're here to exchange recipes and technology." While Sarah and Marcus debated their next move, Admiral Zephyros was putting the finishing touches on his conquest plan. His fleet had assumed standard attack formation, with the dreadnoughts forming the primary battle line and smaller vessels positioned for support and planetary bombardment. "Admiral," Commander Vex announced, "the surrender broadcast is ready for transmission." "Proceed," Zephyros commanded. Across all human communication frequencies, a message began broadcasting in every major Earth language. The voice was mechanical, translated by imperial computers, and carried an unmistakable tone of absolute authority. Primitive beings of the third planet, you are hereby notified that your world has been claimed by the Galactic Empire. You have 12 of your local time units to surrender unconditionally. Failure to comply will result in the complete destruction of your largest population center, followed by systematic bombardment until you submit. Resistance is futile. Your technology cannot harm us. Surrender now, and some of your kind will be allowed to survive as servants of the Empire. The message repeated continuously, overriding television broadcasts, radio stations, and internet communications worldwide. Within minutes, panic began spreading across Earth as governments scrambled to understand what was happening. Sarah Chen stared at her monitoring equipment in shock. Her worst fears were confirmed. The alien signals she had detected weren't explorers or peaceful visitors. They were conquerors, and they had just declared war on humanity. In secret military bunkers around the globe, defense analysts worked frantically to locate and identify the source of the transmission. Satellite networks were redirected to scan for the alien fleet, while military commanders dusted off contingency plans that most had hoped would never be needed. President Elena Rodriguez received the emergency briefing in the White House Situation Room within an hour of the first transmission. Military advisors, NASA officials, and intelligence experts crowded around the table as she absorbed the magnitude of the threat facing humanity. "How many ships are we talking about?" the president asked. General Harrison, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, consulted his tablet. "Initial estimates suggest several hundred vessels, sir. They're positioned approximately 6 billion miles from Earth, just beyond the orbit of Pluto. Our most powerful telescopes are trying to get visual confirmation now. What about their capabilities?" "Unknown, Madam President. But the fact that they crossed interstellar space and can override our global communications systems suggests technology far beyond our current capabilities." President Rodriguez felt the weight of human civilization pressing down on her shoulders. In 12 hours, these aliens would begin attacking. Earth's militaries, despite all their advanced weapons, were designed to fight other humans, not interstellar invaders. "What are our options?" she asked. The room fell silent. Everyone present understood that Earth's weapons, however sophisticated, were primitive compared to technology capable of interstellar travel. Nuclear weapons, electromagnetic pulse devices, kinetic interceptors, humanity's most powerful armaments, suddenly seemed as threatening as sticks and stones. But humanity had survived ice ages, plagues, world wars, and countless other disasters. They had not conquered their own planet and reached for the stars by giving up when faced with overwhelming odds. Around the world, in military academies and research facilities, in corporate boardrooms and government bunkers, the same thought began forming in human minds. If these aliens wanted a fight, humanity would give them one they would never forget. 12 hours had passed since the alien ultimatum, and Admiral Zephyros smiled with satisfaction as he prepared to demonstrate imperial might. The humans had not responded to his surrender demand, which was exactly what he had expected. No primitive species ever believed they faced complete annihilation until they witnessed it firsthand. "Target acquired, Admiral," reported Weapons Officer Kane from his control station. "Tokyo metropolitan area. Coordinates locked. Plasma cannons charged to full power. Fire," Zephyros commanded with casual indifference. The flagship's main plasma cannon unleashed a bolt of superheated energy that streaked through space toward Earth. The weapon carried enough destructive force to vaporize a mountain range and create a crater 50 miles wide. In the Admiral's experience, one such demonstration was usually sufficient to convince any species of the futility of resistance. But as the plasma bolt approached Earth's atmosphere, something unexpected happened. The energy beam struck what appeared to be empty space and simply vanished. No explosion, no impact, no destruction, just complete disappearance, as if the attack had never occurred. "What happened?" Zephyros demanded, his confident expression replaced by confusion. "Unknown, Admiral," Kane replied, frantically checking his instruments. The plasma bolt, simply ceased to exist approximately 2,000 kilometers above the planet's surface. All telemetry indicates the weapon fired correctly, but there was no impact signature. Before Zephyros could respond, his communication officer's urgent voice filled the bridge. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the planet." The main viewer activated, displaying a middle-aged woman in a military uniform standing in what appeared to be a command center. Behind her, dozens of personnel worked at advanced computer terminals that seemed surprisingly sophisticated for such a primitive species. "Greetings," the woman said in clear, unaccented, Imperial Standard language. "I am General Patricia Morgan, Supreme Commander of Earth Defense Forces. Your attack was impressive, but I'm afraid it was entirely ineffective." Zephyros stared at the transmission in disbelief. How could these primitives speak Imperial Standard? How had they defended against his weapons? And what was this Earth Defense Forces they spoke of? "Impossible," he growled. "Our intelligence reports indicate you possess only primitive technology." General Morgan smiled, and Zephyros was disturbed to notice it was not the fearful expression he expected from a conquered species. Instead, it reminded him uncomfortably of the way he smiled before destroying an enemy. "Admiral, your intelligence is approximately 200 years out of date," Morgan replied calmly. "You see, we've been aware of the Galactic Empire for quite some time. In fact, we've been preparing for this exact scenario since 1823. 1823, Zephyros repeated in confusion. "That's impossible. Our first scout probe reached this system only last month." Your first probe that you know about?" Morgan corrected. "We actually captured one of your automated scout drones back in 1823. A fascinating little device. Our scientists spent decades reverse engineering its technology, and we learned a great deal about your empire in the process." The Admiral's mind reeled. A captured scout probe? Imperial probes were equipped with self-destruct mechanisms, specifically to prevent technological contamination. How could primitives have bypassed those safeguards? "Even if that were true," Zephyros said, struggling to regain his composure. 2 centuries would not be sufficient time for a primitive species to match Imperial technology. "You're absolutely right," Morgan agreed. "We couldn't match your technology. So instead, we developed something better. On Earth, Dr. Sarah Chen watched the exchange from the International Defense Coordination Center, a facility that had been secretly constructed beneath the Swiss Alps over the past 50 years. Around her, hundreds of scientists and military personnel monitored the alien fleet through instruments that would have seemed like magic to people from her grandparents' generation. The truth about human technological development was far more complex than the aliens suspected. The captured scout probe had indeed provided crucial information about Imperial technology. But more importantly, it had warned humanity about the Empire's existence. For 2 centuries, the most brilliant minds on Earth had worked in secret to develop defenses against this inevitable invasion. The project had required unprecedented global cooperation. Nations that had been enemies for generations had quietly shared resources and expertise. Scientific breakthroughs had been classified at the highest levels and shared only among a select group of researchers working on the defense initiative. But humanity's greatest advantage wasn't their technology, it was their nature. Where other species had developed along predictable lines, humans were chaos incarnate. They thrived on conflict, adapted to impossible situations, and refused to accept defeat even when logic dictated surrender. The Empire had conquered thousands of worlds using the same tactics, but they had never faced anything like humanity. "Sarah," her colleague Dr. Webb whispered from the station next to hers, "are you seeing the energy readings from their fleet?" Sarah glanced at her monitors and felt her excitement rise. The alien ships were generating massive amounts of power, far beyond what their engines required for maintaining position. They were preparing for a full assault. "They're charging weapons across the entire fleet," she announced to the command center. "All ships appear to be targeting major population centers." General Morgan nodded grimly. She had expected this escalation. The aliens had tested their defenses with a single shot, found them effective, and were now preparing to overwhelm them with massive firepower. It was a logical response, and exactly what her strategists had predicted. "Activate Phase 2, Morgan commanded. Across Earth's surface, previously invisible installations began powering up. What the aliens had mistaken for a planet populated by primitive ape descendants was actually a fortress that had been under construction for 2 centuries. Orbital defense platforms materialized as their cloaking systems deactivated. Weapon emplacements emerged from seemingly natural terrain formations, and in the depths of space, hidden among asteroids and planetary debris, humanity's secret fleet began moving toward attack positions. Admiral Zephyros watched in growing alarm as his sensors detected energy signatures appearing throughout the human system. Ships that his instruments swore hadn't existed moments before were suddenly visible everywhere. Weapons, platforms of unknown design were targeting his fleet from dozens of different vectors. "How many ships?" he demanded from his tactical officer. "Uncertain, Admiral. My sensors are detecting approximately 4,000 vessels." 4,000? Zephyros couldn't hide his shock. "That's impossible. Our scouts detected no shipbuilding infrastructure, no space-based industry. Nothing that could support a fleet of that magnitude." "I hold." "Admiral," his intelligence officer Vex interrupted, "I'm reading massive energy signatures from the planet's surface as well. They appear to have constructed planetary defense weapons inside every major mountain range, and there are orbital installations that simply weren't there an hour ago." The truth was beginning to dawn on Zephyros. The humans hadn't simply reverse-engineered Imperial technology, they had used it as a foundation to create something entirely new. 2 centuries of secret development, hidden from Imperial scouts by advanced cloaking technology and carefully maintained deception, had produced a military force that rivaled his own. "Admiral," Commander Vex announced, with barely controlled panic. "The humans are hailing us again." General Morgan's image reappeared on the main screen, but now her expression was no longer diplomatic. She looked like a predator who had finished toying with her prey. "Admiral Zephyros of the 53rd Imperial Fleet," she began, and the alien leader felt a chill at the casual way she spoke his name and unit designation. "You have 2 choices. You can withdraw from this system immediately and return to your empire with a message, or you can continue this attack and face complete destruction." "You dare threaten the Galactic Empire?" Zephyros roared, his composure finally cracking. "We have conquered 1,000 worlds. Our technology is supreme in the galaxy." "Your technology is impressive," Morgan admitted. "But you've made the same mistake that every empire in history has made. You assumed that military superiority alone was sufficient to guarantee victory. You never bothered to understand your enemy." She gestured to someone off-screen, and the tactical display behind her changed to show a real-time image of the Imperial fleet. Every ship was highlighted in red, with detailed specifications scrolling alongside each vessel. "You see, Admiral, we know everything about your ships, your weapons, your shields, and your tactics. We've studied every battle the Empire has fought for the past 2 centuries. We know exactly how you think, how you fight, and how you fail." Zephyros stared at the display in horror. The humans possessed detailed intelligence about every aspect of Imperial military technology. Somehow, they had been watching and learning for generations while remaining completely hidden. "This information is classified at the highest Imperial levels," he whispered. "How could you possibly have access to it?" Morgan finished his question. "Admiral, do you really think that in 200 years, we never managed to infiltrate your empire? Did you never wonder why some of your conquered populations seemed to adapt so quickly to Imperial rule? Why rebellion movements sometimes possessed surprisingly advanced tactics and equipment?" The implications hit Zephyros like a physical blow. The humans hadn't just been hiding on their planet, preparing defenses. They had been actively operating within Imperial territory, gathering intelligence, learning Imperial weaknesses, and possibly even supporting resistance movements. "You're suggesting that humans have been living within the Empire?" Zephyros asked, though he already dreaded the answer. "Not suggesting, Admiral. Stating, we've had operatives in your territories for over a century. Some of the species you've conquered weren't as primitive as they appeared. Some of them were us. This revelation was beyond Zephyros's worst nightmares. If humans had been operating within the Empire for generations, they could have access to anything: classified Imperial technology, strategic plans, even the locations of Imperial worlds. Impossible, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Our biological scanners would have detected alien infiltrators. Would they? Morgan asked, with that same predatory smile. Admiral, you're dealing with a species that evolved on a world where survival required constant adaptation and deception. We've become very good at appearing to be something we're not. On the bridge of the Time's Eternal Dominion asterisk, Zephyros realized that everything about this encounter had been carefully orchestrated. The humans hadn't been surprised by his arrival, they had been expecting it. Their defensive systems hadn't been hastily assembled, they had been in place for decades. Even this conversation was probably part of a larger strategy designed to achieve some goal he couldn't yet comprehend. What do you want? He asked finally. Admiral, we want you to take a message back to your empire, Morgan replied. Tell them that humanity is no longer hiding. Tell them that the galaxy has a new player, one that doesn't surrender, doesn't kneel, and doesn't retreat. Tell them that if they want a war, we'll give them one unlike anything they've ever experienced. You would challenge the entire Galactic Empire? Zephyros asked in disbelief. We control 10,000 worlds. Our fleets number in the millions. Yes, we would, Morgan said simply. Because, Admiral, you made one critical error in your intelligence assessment. You assumed we were alone. Number 4. The tactical display behind her changed again, showing star maps with dozens of systems highlighted in blue. These are human colonies, Admiral. While you were counting our population at 8 billion on one world, we were secretly establishing settlements throughout this entire region of the galaxy. Every one of these worlds is fortified, armed, and ready for war. Your empire isn't facing a single planet of primitives. You're facing a hidden human civilization that spans 47 star systems. Zephyros felt his legs give out beneath him as he sank into his command throne. 47 systems. That represented a significant military force, possibly large enough to threaten entire Imperial sectors. The humans weren't just defending themselves, they were revealing themselves as a major galactic power that had been operating in secret for generations. You have 1 hour to withdraw your fleet and leave this system, Morgan concluded. If you're still here when the deadline expires, we'll demonstrate why the other species you've conquered were so much easier to defeat than we're going to be. The transmission ended, leaving Zephyros alone with the magnitude of his miscalculation. Around him, his bridge crew waited for orders. But for the first time in his long military career, the Admiral had no idea what those orders should be. Outside the viewport, human ships continued materializing from what had appeared to be empty space, until the alien fleet found itself surrounded by vessels whose technology they didn't understand and whose capabilities they couldn't predict. The easy conquest Admiral Zephyros had anticipated was about to become something else entirely. Admiral Zephyros paced his bridge like a caged predator, his 4 hearts hammering against his chest as the human deadline approached. 53 minutes had passed since General Morgan's ultimatum, and he had spent every one of them wrestling with an impossible decision. Retreat meant returning to the Empire in disgrace, admitting that his supposedly invincible fleet had been defeated without firing a single effective shot. The Council of War would strip him of command, possibly exile him to a penal colony. But staying meant engaging an enemy whose capabilities remained completely unknown. Against odds that seemed to worsen with each passing minute, Admiral, his tactical officer reported, human vessel signatures now number over 6,000. They're continuing to decloak throughout the system. Composition analysis? Zephyros demanded. Unknown, sir. Their technology doesn't match any Empire classifications. Some vessels appear to be larger than our dreadnoughts, while others are too small to register as significant threats. But Admiral, the officer hesitated. Speak. Sir, they're not maintaining any recognizable formation. Imperial doctrine teaches that proper fleet organization is essential for effective combat. But these humans appear to be scattered randomly throughout the system. It makes no tactical sense. Zephyros frowned. Random positioning was indeed militarily illogical. Either the humans were complete amateurs, despite their advanced technology, or they were employing tactics so alien that Imperial strategists had never considered them. Sir, Commander Vex approached with a data tablet. I've completed analysis of the human transmission frequencies. Admiral, they're not using standard subspace communications. Explained. Their ships are communicating through quantum entanglement networks. Instantaneous coordination across unlimited distances. Completely immune to jamming or interception. If this technology is standard throughout their fleet, they possess coordination capabilities beyond anything in the Imperial arsenal. Another piece of evidence that humanity was far more advanced than their deception had indicated. Zephyros began to suspect that even their current technological display might be only a fraction of their true capabilities. Admiral, the communications officer announced. 5 minutes until deadline. On Earth, General Morgan stood in the command center, watching displays that showed every ship in the alien fleet. Her expression remained calm. But inside, she felt the same mixture of fear and anticipation that had driven humanity since the beginning of time. Everything they had prepared for across 2 centuries was about to be tested. General, her aide Colonel Harrison approached. The fleet commanders are requesting permission to begin Phase 3. Negative, Morgan replied. We stick to the timeline. If they withdraw, we let them go. If they stay, she paused, looking at the alien formation. If they stay, we show them why humanity has never been successfully conquered by anyone. Dr. Sarah Chen monitored the approaching deadline from her station, surrounded by instruments that could track individual particles across interstellar distances. The technology around her represented the pinnacle of human achievement, but it had been built on a foundation of captured alien knowledge combined with uniquely human innovation. Sarah, Dr. Webb called from his station. I'm detecting massive power buildup from the alien flagship. They're charging weapons again. All vessels or just the command ship? Just the flagship, but, Sarah, the power levels are off the charts. This isn't a demonstration shot like before. They're preparing to fire everything they have. Sarah quickly relayed the information to General Morgan, who nodded grimly. The aliens had chosen confrontation over retreat. Now humanity would discover whether 2 centuries of preparation had been sufficient. All stations, initiate Phase 3, Morgan commanded. Aboard the Time's Eternal Dominion asterisk, Zephyros had reached his decision. Pride, duty, and 3 centuries of imperial victories demanded that he fight rather than flee. No primitive species had ever defeated an imperial fleet, and he refused to be the first admiral to retreat without battle. Attention, all ships, he broadcast to his fleet. Target the largest human vessels and prepare for coordinated bombardment. We shall obliterate their fleet and reduce their planet to molten slag. For the glory of the Empire, 300 imperial vessels turned toward their targets, weapons charging with enough combined firepower to sterilize an entire solar system. Plasma cannons, antimatter torpedoes, and gravitational disruptors prepared to unleash destruction on a scale that few species had ever witnessed and survived. Fire! Zephyros roared. The Imperial fleet unleashed hell. Energy beams that could crack planets streaked through space toward human targets. Antimatter warheads that could vaporize cities raced toward the blue world that had dared to challenge Imperial supremacy. Gravitational weapons capable of crushing matter at the atomic level reached out to tear human ships apart. And then, something impossible happened. The massive barrage of Imperial firepower struck the human fleet and simply stopped. Not absorbed, not deflected, not destroyed, just frozen in place, as if time itself had been suspended around the human vessels. What in the name of the void? Zephyros whispered, staring at the tactical display in disbelief. Hundreds of Imperial attacks hung motionless in space, their destructive energy somehow suspended in mid-flight. The human ships sat calmly within this bubble of frozen destruction, completely untouched and apparently unconcerned. Admiral, his science officer called out with barely controlled panic. I'm reading massive temporal distortions throughout the human fleet. They appear to have created localized time dilation fields. Temporal manipulation? Zephyros felt his world collapsing around him. Time manipulation was theoretical even for the Empire, requiring technology that existed only in the most advanced research laboratories. How is this possible? His answer came from General Morgan's voice, which somehow reached every ship in his fleet simultaneously, despite the fact that communications should have been impossible through the temporal distortions. Admiral Zephyros, her voice echoed through Imperial communication systems. You're witnessing humanity's first gift to the galaxy: temporal manipulation technology. Those weapons you fired are now locked in stasis fields. We can release them at any time, but they'll return to their points of origin, rather than continuing toward their targets. The implications struck Zephyros like a physical blow. The humans could redirect his own weapons back at his fleet. Every shot he had fired was now a potential attack against his own ships. But that's not our only gift, Morgan continued. We'd like to introduce you to our second innovation: dimensional phase technology. Later, around the Imperial fleet, space itself began to ripple. Stars flickered and shifted as reality bent in ways that defied every law of physics in Imperial databases. And through these dimensional rifts, more human vessels began emerging, not dozens or hundreds, but thousands upon thousands of ships that appeared to be arriving from other dimensions entirely. Admiral, his tactical officer reported with a voice that cracked with terror. New contacts appearing throughout the system. Current count exceeds 50,000 vessels. And still climbing. 50,000? Zephyros collapsed into his command throne. A fleet of that magnitude could conquer entire Imperial sectors. Where are they coming from? Where are they coming from? Unknown, sir. They appear to be phasing in from parallel dimensions. Admiral, this technology is beyond anything in our databases. We have no countermeasures for dimensional warfare. General Morgan's voice filled the Imperial communication channels again, and this time there was something in her tone that made even the bravest Imperial warriors feel cold fear creeping through their veins. Admiral, you asked earlier how humanity could challenge the Galactic Empire, she said. The answer is simple. While your empire conquered worlds, we conquered physics itself. On the main view screen of every Imperial ship, Morgan's image appeared alongside a display showing human vessels emerging from dimensional portals throughout the galaxy. You see, Admiral, the colonies I mentioned aren't just in this dimension. Humanity has spread across multiple parallel universes, each one developing technology that your single-dimensional empire never imagined. We've had 2 centuries to explore the infinite variations of reality, and we've learned things that would shatter your understanding of existence itself. Zephyros watched in horror as the tactical display showed human fleets appearing in Imperial territory across dozens of star systems. Somehow, these interdimensional humans had achieved simultaneous deployment throughout the galaxy, striking at Imperial worlds that should have been impossible to reach. But Admiral, Morgan continued, we're not conquerors like your empire. We don't want to rule other species or destroy civilizations. We want something far more dangerous to your way of life. We want freedom. What? Zephyros managed to whisper. Freedom, Admiral, for every species your empire has enslaved. For every world you've conquered. For every civilization you've crushed under Imperial rule. We're offering them a choice. Remain under Imperial domination, or join humanity in building something better. The communication channels filled with new voices, alien languages from across the galaxy, all broadcasting the same message. Liberation from Imperial rule. Zephyros realized with mounting horror that human agents weren't just operating within Imperial territory, they were coordinating a galaxy-wide rebellion. You see, Admiral, Morgan explained, while you were busy maintaining control through fear and force, we were busy making friends. Turns out, most species don't actually enjoy being enslaved. Who would have thought? Throughout the Imperial fleet, officers reported incoming messages from Imperial worlds. Rebellion had erupted simultaneously across hundreds of systems. Slave species were rising against their masters, supported by advanced human technology and interdimensional reinforcements. This is impossible, Zephyros muttered. The Empire has maintained order for millennia. Our subjects are pacified, controlled, monitored. Admiral. Morgan's voice carried a note of sympathy. Your empire's greatest weakness was assuming that every species would react to conquest the same way. Most species submit when faced with overwhelming force. Humans don't. And once we started teaching other species that submission isn't their only option, well, the galaxy became a much more interesting place. The tactical displays showed the scope of the disaster facing the Empire. Imperial fleets throughout the galaxy were reporting similar encounters with impossible human technology. Some were withdrawing in panic, others were attempting to fight and being completely outmatched. A few were even defecting, their crews switching sides when offered the choice between serving an empire built on oppression or joining a coalition dedicated to freedom. "What do you want?" Zephyros asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Unconditional surrender of the Galactic Empire," Morgan replied matter-of-factly. "Dissolution of all Imperial military forces. Freedom for every enslaved species, and establishment of a new galactic government based on voluntary cooperation rather than forced submission." "And if we refuse?" Morgan's smile returned, and this time it was absolutely terrifying. "Then we'll demonstrate our third gift to the galaxy. Reality manipulation technology. We can literally rewrite the laws of physics in localized areas. Imagine trying to fight a war when your enemies can make your weapons cease to function. Your ships forget how to fly. Or your soldiers forget how to breathe." To emphasize her point, the Imperial fleet suddenly found their engines shutting down, despite every indicator showing they should be operational. Life support systems began cycling through random configurations. Weapons controls responded to commands by playing musical tones instead of charging plasma cannons. "Of course," Morgan continued as Imperial systems returned to normal, "we'd prefer to avoid that level of intervention. Violence is such an inefficient way to solve problems, don't you think?" Admiral Zephyros looked around his bridge at officers who had dedicated their lives to Imperial service, at instruments that had guided him through 3 centuries of conquest, at the accumulated symbols of Imperial might that suddenly seemed as fragile as children's toys. "Admiral," Commander Vex approached hesitantly, "we're receiving surrender offers from 17 sectors. Imperial Command is requesting immediate strategic consultation, but—" He paused. "Sir, I'm not sure what strategic options remain available to us." Zephyros activated his personal communication system, broadcasting on the frequency reserved for Imperial surrender. "General Morgan," he said, his voice heavy with defeat, "Admiral Zephyros of the former 53rd Imperial Fleet formally requests terms of surrender." "Excellent choice, Admiral," Morgan replied. "You and your crews will be treated according to galactic conventions of war. Your ships will be escorted to designated areas where you can await transport back to Imperial space. And Admiral, you might want to take some time to think about what kind of galaxy you want to live in going forward." As human vessels moved into escort positions around the Imperial fleet, Zephyros reflected on the magnitude of his miscalculation. He had come to conquer what he believed was a primitive species, and instead had encountered a civilization that had transcended the normal limitations of existence itself. The Galactic Empire, built on the assumption that superior firepower could control any situation, had just met a species that considered firepower to be merely one option among infinite possibilities. And in the depths of space, as Imperial fleets throughout the galaxy began surrendering to human forces, a new chapter in galactic history began to unfold. An empire built on fear was giving way to something unprecedented. A civilization built on the radical idea that freedom was worth fighting for. Even against impossible odds, Dr. Sarah Chen watched the surrender ceremonies from her monitoring station, marveling at how far humanity had traveled from the primitive species that had first detected Imperial scout probes 2 centuries ago. They had started as the hunted and had become the hunters. Not through superior firepower, but through superior imagination. As the last Imperial ship powered down its weapons, Sarah smiled and began composing her report. After decades of searching for signs of alien life, she had finally found them, and humanity had taught them something new about the nature of freedom. The galaxy would never be the same.